Mhm.
Very good. I think we can start. And you can see the presentation, right? I'm going to just move to the next one. There you go. So hi, everyone. It is really a great pleasure to be part of this Learning Planet Festival. I am amazed like how much and how many events can we join in this festival. It's really great. And this logo of the festival, which is to bring the world together to learn and to take care of oneself, others, and the planet, really called our attention. And that's why I decided to join this great festival. And so I'm Mariana, and this is Simon. And we are here on the behalf of Logosophy Institution, and we are students of Logosophy. And the goal of this activity that's prepared today is to share a little bit the benefits that we got by studying Logosophy, and especially to take control of our life, our thoughts and actions, and not leave it to a chance. But let me start mentioning what Logosophy is. And Logosophy is a science that was created in 1930 in Argentina by a thinker, educator, and humanist, González Pecot. In 2023, we are completing 93 years old of Logosophy in the world, and we are completing 30 years here in Europe, so it's a year of a lot of celebrations. And it is an institution created accredited in several countries, in America and Europe, and also we are also in Israel and Australia, as a non-profit organization with no political or religious affiliation of any kind, and it's privately owned institution funded by its fellow member. So I like to describe, just to give a little bit more about Logosophy, I like to describe Logosophy as an institution that instead of trying to offer a better world to the humanity, it does the other way around. It seeks to offer a better human being to the world. So the only way to do that is through education. And Logosophy teaches the ability of thinking for ourselves, to observe and to understand our thoughts and our feelings. It also has a school like devoted for kids, where the kids can learn like the basic curriculum, but with the base of the Logosophical pedagogy. And its founder, González Pecot, wrote several books about Logosophy, and he's also an editor of a magazine and a newspaper, and gave more than 1,000 of conferences and classes. And he always committed to teaching and promoting Logosophy knowledge around the world. But let's get started. As I said, Sam and I are going to share a little bit how Logosophy has been teaching us to gain control over our own life. I hope you enjoy. And I would like to start with a question. Are we conscious of what we think, do, or fail to do during the day? So for me, it was only with Logosophy that I could truly see that I wasn't. And I missed out many moments of my life in the sense that I was there, of course, but I wasn't consciously there, you know, doing things without really noticing that I was doing. Let me take out this slide first, and then I put it back. I think it's going to be better. There is a saying in Logosophy that I want to share that helped me to become more aware of this reality. So I do need to go back to this. So with this passage of Logosophy, helped me to understand and to see that I really got distracted sometimes, and not really noticing that I got distracted, but noticing how the harm that it made it in my life. And it goes like this. In general, man is not conscious of what he thinks, does, or fails to do during the most of the day. In other words, he is not aware of what is happening in his inner self. He becomes distracted very easily or unnecessarily seek motives for distraction. So I would start telling like the first time that I come in contact with Logosophy and how it helped me to identify those moments of distractions and how I gradually could change this reality within me. So I went to a Logosophical open talk, just like this one here, and the talk was about thoughts. So he named all kind of thoughts that one could have, and by its functions and its characteristics. And at the end of the talk, an exercise was proposed, and that exercise stuck with me. And the exercise was try to think only one thought. And at that time, I was planning a trip, my first trip all by myself in South America, and I was very motivated about it. I want to plan everything in detail and so on. And in my journey back home from that talk, I proposed myself, okay, I'm gonna think about that trip. So I was mentally planning for everything that I needed to do. So I was thinking and thinking, but suddenly I caught myself in another thought, and a very unrelated thought that there is nothing to do with the travel plans that I was trying to think. And it really shocked me and called my attention, like I how much I got distracted, and I tried to follow back my thoughts to see where have I deviated from the main thoughts that I want. So I follow back one by one, and surprisingly, I was very far away from the thoughts of the trip. A lot of other thoughts not related to the travel plans come and go in my mind. And before I really realized that I wasn't thinking about the trip anymore. So I didn't plan to think about those thoughts. I didn't want to think about those because I was very committed to think about the trip. But even though it happened, and so I got scared, the lack of control I had over my thoughts. And I remember asking myself, like, isn't it normal to have those kind of movements of the mind, of the thoughts? It's really possible to control what I'm thinking and when I want to think it. So I would also like to suggest you to try this exercise later on. Just choose one thing to think about and see if you can stay on it. Observing yourself and see how much other non-related thoughts come and go to your mind, and if you can control them or not. So now I will pass the word to Simon. Let's hear him.
Thanks, Mariana. Yeah, before I'd started to study Logosophy, I had tried quite a few different, we could call them self-development methods or ways to try and improve myself in some way to be better. But often I realized this was kind of driven by a sense of needing to also answer some kind of bigger question of life, like, why are we here? What is reality? Although in some ways I wasn't exactly clear what I was looking for when I was searching for these different kind of methods. I'm not denying that there was value to some of those things that I tried to pursue, but I couldn't help noticing that it was with Logosophy that I began to actually experience thoughts as a more tangible, practical reality that you could begin to work with, rather than a topic that can kind of seem a bit like less than air, let's say, insubstantial. So what do I mean by this exactly? I'll start with a small example that might make things clearer. Basically, it'd been a habit with me, I think, as with a number of people these days, to look at the social media and the internet. And for me, due to my line of work in video, it was online videos, including a well-known video site, that caused the problem. What would happen is I would go on there, like log onto the internet, just with some intention of looking just at something briefly, or just to quickly see what's there. I'm sure people have done something similar, maybe with other websites. In some cases, though, this could turn into far too much time, and then I wouldn't accomplish tasks that I'd meant to, and I'd regret wasting the time afterwards. And sometimes I'd even do this instead of spending time with my family, at least for a bit. As I say, I'm sure you've experienced something at least similar to this, where it's a behavior that you repeat, even though you know and are aware afterwards that it's not helpful, and yet the behavior repeats. And perhaps like me, you try to do things like habit changing techniques. These are quite popular at the moment. Personally, I tried some apps which restrict your access to the internet for periods of time, just to try to block the more manipulative habit forming techniques that are sometimes employed by these technology companies. And some of this was helpful to an extent, but it was with Logosophy that I began to more fully kind of get to the bottom of what was going on here, because I actually began to discover more of the reality of my, let's call it, internal world and the mental movements that are occurring there. And I don't mean that I now have complete control and mastery over every thought in my mind, or that I don't have situations where I sometimes get distracted still. But I discovered, firstly, even some improvement in understanding the reality of our internal world can make a difference. And in some ways, as I'll explain, hopefully, it's the discovery of this mental world that ends up being more important than any specific improvement in productivity or focus in itself. I mean, as important as those things are. But let's hold up here for a minute. I mean, what is an internal world? Is that just a kind of fancy sounding term or notion people talk about, or is that actually something real? I mean, have you ever thought about whether you have something called an internal world, or what that would mean? And already I've realized that it can be a kind of a difficult thing to express to someone unfamiliar with Logosophy, and really it is a big topic. So perhaps another analogy will just help explain something about thoughts. If we take an example where you hear a song on the radio, maybe later you find yourself humming it. In that instance, did you deliberately decide to think about that song? Or did it seem to sort of just enter into your head unannounced? I mean, if you pay attention, you'll probably find that the thought about the song seems to come and go almost according to its own whim, sometimes to the point that you don't want to think about the song. Maybe you don't even like it, but yet it still keeps coming into your mind. And if you observe a bit more, probably won't you find that that's the case with quite a few other things as well in other situations. So what really is happening there? And can you prove to yourself that this does indeed happen to you? As much really as you can verify that you could touch an object in your surrounding external world, can you also verify that there are these movements of thoughts, that they are occurring, even though you might not have paid attention to them or noticed them much before? And Logosophy has an interesting concept about the thoughts, which is summed up in this teaching. If we could bring up the slide. Yeah, which goes, it says, there intervene thoughts which have a life of their own. In other words, thoughts which move carry out their activities independently of any participation of the mind that lodges them. So this is another question. How are you able to verify that these thoughts and internal movements do exist? If they don't have any shape or form you can see with your eyes, how are you able to do that? And now I'll pass back to Mariana. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, this concept of thought was also very important for me, and because it helped me to understand the reason why I couldn't sustain one thought long time in my mind. And my thoughts acquire life of their own and act independent of their will. In Logosophy, I learned that it was possible to control my thought. It was not easy to do it, but it was possible. And I learned that I should start by getting to know the thoughts that was in my mind, identify them, where they come from, who they are, and select them, get the ones that I really wanted to use. And I started to make an examination of my thoughts, take notes of the ones that had great influence within me, the ones that were frequently in my mind. And it was then that I admit that I had a tendency to daydream. And I observed myself like wandering on many occasions during the day. And I caught myself imagine living here in another place or in another country, or imagining unrealistic situations, things that was really without a purpose, or things that was not achievable, or really imaginative things. So even though it was very common in my reality, it happens like so many times during my day, I could only really admit it and identify the harm that it was causing to me after studying Logosophy. And even though I had this identify, okay, I do the daydream, I have those thoughts in my mind, it wasn't easy to stop and replace it. So I was like, it was through the study of Logosophy that I had the tools that helped me to experience the teachings and the applying the concepts that's in my life, that I could slowly change that reality, and to the point that I could really get a little bit more control over my thoughts. And I want to share a little bit how I come to having more control, what tools or what did I do to be able to do such. So that helped me to control my thoughts. So everyone's gonna have a different tool, a different way to get it done. But for me, I use a very familiar tool that most of you know. It's the to-do list. So instead of using it to organize my day, my activities, I use it to organize my thoughts. So I did a list of things that I want to think about, and I kind of called it my to think list. And then what I did was I got I plan ahead, right? All the thoughts that I really want to think. And I use that list when I see myself wandering. So when I notice myself that I was like started to daydream or anything, I got that list and I got one thought from that list and I start to think about that thought. So I could like quickly get back on track, like stop being distracted and think about something useful, something that I really needed to think about. And I must admit, it wasn't easy to do it. First of all, it wasn't easy to create the list. Like I saw myself for many times hesitating to create the list. And of course, to manage and to use that list. So it took me a while to be able to stop myself and replace those thoughts. It was a process, but it was only with the study of Logosophy that I felt this strength to be able to do this and change this reality in my day. And I start to observe also the days that I was able to use the list and the days that I didn't use the list, and how was this my inner self, how I was it affects on my day, how the difference of on my mood, on my motivations, on my performance in my work. So making this like comparisons make me more into do that list more often, because it was very reinforcing for me, and I could see the change in myself. So I slowly start to see that I could gain more control of my thoughts. So I was the one deciding and in charge what I was thinking, and I could organize better my thoughts and my mind, in a sense. So I was like organizing when the thoughts should come and when the thoughts should go, and to the extent that I observe and see things more inside of me. So I was able to see things about myself that I was able to see it before. And always, like I'm talking about within myself, right? Things that happens in my mind and in my inner world. And so I discovered this new reality, right? The reality of having an inner world or inner self, that I wasn't aware of it before Logosophy. So I wonder, how about you as well, if you know about this reality, if you are aware that you have an inner world, and how often do you think about those things? So we'll go back to Simon now.
Okay, thanks, Mariana. Yeah, just to continue, one other image that can be helpful to get more of a grasp on this is the image of a kind of a bus or mental vehicle, where different thoughts are kind of getting on and off whenever they please. And to be clear, it's not that there's a problem with maybe watching online videos or having some stray thoughts about a song. In itself, that's not necessarily a problem. And I don't want to give any impression at any point that Logosophy is about kind of anxiously watching every thought that comes into your mind in a kind of tense, anxious state. What we're talking about can be quite a natural process that occurs without any kind of undue force. And really the question, like for me with this online video distraction, the important question was, did I make ever a conscious decision about spending that time watching those videos in that case? Or did the thoughts to kind of go and watch that just get onto that mental bus when they decided to? And did I like the result of that happening? And I'm sure that if you reflect on any time that you've fallen prey to distraction in whatever way it is, you'll probably find the same, that this was a period of life that you didn't consciously or deliberately decide to live that way. And for me, these kind of observations led me to some other questions, such as, I mean, how many moments do I live this way? And in general, how much of my life is made up of like following thoughts that seem to enter into my mind, thoughts that I didn't choose, and in some cases want, that kind of move around in one direction and then do something else for a bit after a while. And all this movement kind of going on in your internal world whilst you try to live your daily life, deal with the daily struggles that are happening. Like, is all that helping it, or is it kind of interfering? And Logosophy presents another a concept about this, which it may seem almost a bit alarming at first, but I think the author of Logosophy writes this because he's observed it as very common amongst people. And it says, the hours in which the mind wanders aimlessly without occupying itself in anything or in doing unimportant things is sterile time. A time spent without living, a time that passes without leaving in the conscience any memory of what was lived during these hours, which extend in most people to days, months, and years. And when I honestly reflected on that passage, I couldn't really deny that there can be many instances or stretches of time where life is lived that way. And in fact, as I kind of explored this more, began to put some time into observing it, I discovered something else important, that the movements and actions of these thoughts had created a kind of half-formed concepts about many kinds of things. Opinions on anything from politics, some kind of passing trivia in the news or amongst friends, goals or projects that weren't really coherently formed once you began to investigate this. And even to the big questions such as what is a human being, or why are we here? All of this kind of just accumulated without necessarily any conscious direction. And it was kind of like beginning to be aware of a piece of land with some uncultivated spaces, some with weeds growing, others with bare sort of patches of earth where nothing had really been done, or other bits that had been planted half-heartedly just to be abandoned later on. And I mean, I'm not going to say that my mind is now some perfectly cultivated, immaculate garden. The process of cultivating these more coherent concepts that prove themselves as being able to work better in life, that's an ongoing process in Logosophy. And at first, the process of doing this can seem kind of a bit clunky or awkward. Also, our imagination can sometimes try to carry out this work instead of using our faculties, which we'll learn about that we do have, such as thinking, observation, reflection, and just a little bit more about that shortly. But how exactly would we go about then doing this and gaining more conscious control of thoughts if you begin noticing that they are sometimes acting a bit more like rowdy passengers getting on and off the bus? So just returning to the example of the getting distracted from online videos, in this instance, whilst I started observing what happened here, I noticed a thought to check them could appear in the mind. For instance, if some work I was doing reached a kind of a less interesting part or became a bit difficult, and I'm sure maybe there's something similar to this that you can relate to, though perhaps the thought that was triggered was to get food from the fridge or make a phone call to talk with friends or whatever it is. And after a while, I learned to actually identify this thought as what we call curiosity. And I began to also notice a thought that we could call impulsiveness that was there as well. And in Logosophy, there are actually many opportunities for learning how to identify thoughts in quite a specific way, or quite a precise way. And curiosity is a term that has a bit more specific use in Logosophy, where it's referring more to that idle desire to see what happens next, the kind of thought that might prompt you to check the latest gossip on social media, or even to buy some new product that promises new and interesting things that kind of sound interesting. And to extend this, the process of becoming more aware of my internal world as something real, rather than just like a vague concept, just doing that can be sometimes enough for changes to start happening. And I began to get more used to noticing when a thought was acting and how that felt like internally. And it's by noticing that a thought is trying to, get onto that mental bus, and then being able to use my faculty of thinking to reflect on what thought I actually wanted to think, or what thought I wanted to be there. And this is a practical skill. As Mariana suggested, it requires consciously thinking about what kind of thoughts we want to have close to hand, which can be something we're not actually used to doing. But as we get more used to doing this, the useful and productive thoughts that we want to have, we find that they can become a bit easier to access. And there's much more to say about this process and how you can actually create change thoughts. And I'm very much still learning. But there's no kind of artificial or strange trick to this that can replace developing the ability to actually observe these kind of mental movements. And there's no substitute to developing that ability to observe what's happening as something real. In a way, no substitute for the effort, and it does require effort, of thinking in advance what you want to think. And if there's one teaching that has really summarized for me, it really summarizes what I've been trying to talk about here. And it is something you can begin to start verifying, like right now. But it has big implications for life, I think. And it says, thoughts, in spite of their immateriality. Oh, sorry, did it pop off?
Sorry, I think I got the wrong one. Let me put it again.
Oh, I thought that was the right one, was it?
Oh, sorry. Okay, back on. Good.
Yeah, that's the one. Thoughts, in spite of their immateriality, are as visible and tangible as if they were endowed with a corporeal quality. For if a living creature or inanimate object which have a physical existence are visible to our eyes and can be touched by our physical hands, thoughts can be seen by the eyes of our intelligence and touched by the hands of our understanding. And perhaps that seems feasible, or perhaps this seems like a lot of effort or a bit intense to start trying to carry out this work of having more deliberate and conscious control of your thoughts. Maybe it sounds like something for very dedicated people to concern themselves with. And it's understandable. And there are times when it has and still does seem possibly a little overwhelming or unachievable. But I've increasingly learned that the thoughts acting in the mental world, it is a reality and it's occurring and it's having an effect on us, whether we want to pay attention to it or not. But the work of activating our intelligence and its faculties to have more deliberate control of our thoughts is a process, and it cannot and it doesn't need to happen all at once. It requires effort, but kind of like doing exercise, it can feel a bit uncomfortable at first if we're not used to it. And the reality is most of us actually aren't. And it's suggested, even though some of us may work very hard and feel like we have to think a lot in our job, it is suggested in Logosophy that it's very common to mostly only use two faculties, which are memory and imagination. The others, we may use them, but only for specific jobs or obligations in life and in limited context. So like any kind of sensible exercise, we would build it up progressively and get more used to kind of using the faculties of our intelligence, the faculties that we do have and are naturally there. So it's kind of like beginning to tend to that garden, to tidy it up, to plant seeds more deliberately. And I'd like to just briefly relate one other small example. And I hope it will show that what we're talking about is very practical, and it also how everyday issues connect to big sounding topics like the purpose of life. And also, as part of my work some time ago, I had to record expenses in a way that I was kind of not familiar with. And at first, this process caused a lot of stress. And I was struggling to record them. And I found myself surrounded by disorder in terms of literal pieces of paper, and this creating disorder mentally as well. And before, I might have uttered a phrase like, I'm not good at organizing admin. It's not something I'm good at, or even just I'm not organized. But with what I'd been learning from Logosophy, I reflected, or I asked myself the question, so what thoughts do I have in my mind regarding organizing and processing these expenses? And what concepts did I even have of taking care of that kind of task? And I realized that I didn't really have a process there as such. Basically, I regarded that kind of task, as something not very interesting, to be given kind of the least amount of attention and observation possible before I could get to more appealing seeming things. But by doing that, it was actually causing more problems and causing more waste of time. So it actually took only like a moderate bit of effort and time to come up with some new ideas about how to process these, and a little more effort to kind of just carry through with the consistency of any actions to kind of solidify this. But perhaps more surprisingly, this small instance, it became more interesting because I was able to view it as an opportunity to bring more order to my life, which is something that I wasn't always that great at, and then to discover a bit more about my internal world. And it was surprising that I discovered I could be in the habit of kind of not wanting to think, or of not wanting to use those faculties of intelligence that I do possess, exactly as if the act of thinking was kind of uncomfortable or undesirable. Again, something to be done in work situations or in specific situations where I did have to think about things a lot, but then turned off as soon as it wasn't needed. So eventually I did begin to ask, why did I have that attitude? And I realized that to actually think, and thinking rather than just thoughts passing through the mind in Logosophy means something quite specific. And while doing that, there is effort involved, but it's usually an empowering process. But you can, and it is possible, to mistake thinking and the act of thinking with a collection of thoughts passing through the mind, often with no purpose or not a pleasant effect. And I think this can be very common. I mean, have you ever noticed a difference between thoughts passing through the mind versus using a faculty of thinking? Could you recognize the difference? And how plausible does that seem? Does that seem plausible, or does it still seem a bit too abstract? And this did lead me to paying more attention in a broader way to kind of what other areas of my life I might be living on what we could call autopilot mode. I began paying more attention to various projects and goals. And I realized that some of these, they really weren't as clearly defined as I'd thought, or more accurately, we could say imagined. And in one case, realizing this and deliberately making changes, they weren't that huge, caused a fairly significant and positive change to my whole work and income. And I only mention that just to stress that this investigating this issue of how the thoughts move in your internal world, it is not an abstract or rarefied process. It begins to change life in real ways. And it is something worth paying attention to. I mean, you may well not have problems with organizing expenses, or you may be an organized person in that regard. But you know, are there other areas of life that are running on autopilot? You know, areas or problems that may be blamed on external circumstances, just as I might have blamed the expense recording as another small but troublesome burden that I put on me in life. And it is one teaching in Logosophy that probably sums up the importance of this for me. It's this one, and it's quite well known to students of Logosophy. And it says, surely life changes merely by changing the thoughts that sustain it, morally, psychologically, and spiritually. And it's worth contemplating that. But I'll pass back to Mariana now. Thank you.
I'm on mute. There you go. Thank you, Simon. So yeah, now I want to share an experience that on how I managed to change my thoughts to better deal with a family member. So I think it will illustrate how becoming more aware of a series of changes that I do in my way, the changes of thinking and feeling can help me to deal with small and big problems, right, that I face during my day. So I feel like as many people, I also had some difficulties dealing with some family members, and I felt annoyed by that person, and I have a very, very hard time to deal with her. And in her presence, I noticed myself being filled with a lot of negative thoughts, and those negative thoughts was made me also a little bit rude and impatient and intolerant. And it was not easy to admit this to myself, but it did make me also a very hard person to deal with. And I couldn't help myself from getting those thoughts. And all those thoughts, like as I said, was changing my behavior, was turning like those moments, family moments, into a nightmare. And I didn't want that. And I noticed also that this bad relationship with that person was affecting my relationship with another beloved person. And because of Logosophy, I could see that I was acting in the way that was not me, or at least it was not who I wanted to be. And why, right? I ask myself, why can I get along with that person? I feel like I'm a nice person, but why with that specific person it just don't go well. And in the middle of that struggle that I was telling about trying to collect better thoughts, trying to control my thoughts and do my to think list, but I still see myself struggle and reacting in a totally different way from a person that I want to be. So in the middle of the way, as I was saying, I got in contact with this question in a book from Logosophy. Let me share here. Is this one? Got it? Until when we keep on thinking that it's for others to change their ways? Aren't we bestowing the others a benefit that we deny to ourselves? So with this, I understood that I was waiting on others to change. I wish for others to change their way so I wouldn't have any problem to deal with. Why do I have to wait for others to change, to have a better life, to live better moments? So when I did that flip, I understood that, I started to look inside of me, searching for things that I needed to change first, and then saw how much I was limiting myself by not changing. It was then that I realized that when I change myself, my whole life expands because I'm improving who I am. I'm becoming better. I'm becoming more capable of dealing with so many other situations that I wasn't able to deal before. And I was learning to be better. So that person slowly started to bother me. And nowadays, she doesn't bother me as much. And when she eventually does, I try to understand why. I try to go to the cause of it. Like, why is this bothering me? Is there anything else that I need to change there? Is there anything else to learn from, to perfect myself, to become better? And let me tell you that everything that I identify, uh, every time that I identify something that I need to work on, I need to get better at, it can be some small things or big things. It kind of brings me happiness. It's like, in a way, a happiness of overcoming my own difficulties, a happiness of identify something that I can improve, that I can make myself better. And the happiness is in this effort to be better, is in the effort to search for a solution. I search for a solution coming from within me. I identify and then I go and try to be better. And I feel this joy of conducting my life to the destiny that I want to live, and to the change what I need to change within in my inner world, to active and to be the person that I want to be, and to live the life that I want to live. So I ask myself, like, and I ask Simon, like, if you feel the same happiness when you find something that you need to work on.
Yeah, so absolutely. It's happiness and even a certain amount of power when you become aware of this possibility of changing the internal world in this real but natural and normal way. And some of it is kind of hard to put into words, the effect of realizing this can happen. And it's why people do continue to study logosophy for a long time, or for the rest of their lives in some case. But perhaps this also sounds slightly strange, this being happy about finding something negative within yourself. It's maybe not kind of a normal or usual thing to do. And I know for myself and other logosophy students that this is how it feels, because it means that you've discovered something useful, or I've discovered a useful clue about myself that I can apply to life in general. And so it becomes a kind of interesting process of discovery. And it is one of those most interesting things I've discovered, is that these seemingly small moments can give clues to the bigger questions in life that I think everyone does have in some way or another. I mean, for instance, if I'm not the thoughts in my mind when I get distracted by whatever it is, videos or something else, then who am I if I'm not those thoughts? And really, this is one of the core topics of logosophy. And as far as I can tell, that is always at least an aim of any topic that could be called broadly spiritual that I've looked into in the past. I mean, and it's beyond the scope of anything I can briefly say in this talk here, but for myself, studying the thoughts, their actions, this grand sounding topic of who you are begins to make more sense and be more practical. Because if logosophy does talk about a concept of the spirit, which it does, it's not that this is a theoretical or abstract belief that's suddenly being kind of introduced after having talked about all these practical measures. I mean, after all, many people are not aware that their thoughts do in fact move according to their own will. But it is something that you can begin to observe directly and learn about. And I mean, hopefully, maybe that's a bit clearer after this talk. And the spirit, now that might either be a kind of a mystified sounding, remote sounding idea, or one that has lots of existing kind of confusing associations for you. But ultimately, in logosophy, it's no different to the approach we've just been talking about here, which is practical and experimental. And really the topic of who we really are, it should be practical matter of direct relevance to our lives. And in Logosophy, it is precisely in the field of our everyday life that we begin to understand and verify answers to those kind of big sounding questions. And it is strange to think who would have thought that tackling those topics of getting distracted by online videos or recording expenses, how those could lead to insights about who I really am. And I'll pass back to Mariana for the final word on that.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, so I hope that this talk brought you an interesting thing to think about. And so the things that we're talking here make you feel something different inside of you. And it may cause you, it may because you really want to know a little bit more about your own self and about all these topics that we brought. And if you are interested in learning more about Logosophy, the best way is to subscribe for free course. Let me share the screen here so you guys gonna so we can subscribe and look at the websites and sending us an email, or you can use this QR code that's gonna move you to subscribe in this free course that I was talking about. That if you're interested, it's something that we can show a little bit more what Logosophy is, what the subjects of Logosophy. And also in the Logosophy website, you can find some other videos just like that have some presentations just like this one that we did with another students of Logosophy with different topics that we hope you join. But that's it for tonight. And we want to say thank you for being here. Wish you all a good night.
Yeah. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Simon. Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.
Yeah.